Last time on Darkcore Frontiers. The heist on the Aegis transport reaches its climax as Ironclaw's team confront the Darkcore shards. With the Space Authority closing in, Captain Grimhelm orders a hasty retreat. Nex, the young Zraynian Stowaway, desperately seeks to stop the pirates, temporarily disabling the Nebula Nighthawk. But the plan backfires when the Darkcore shards begin to react, creating dangerous energy anomalies. As the ship sustains heavy damage and the Authority fleet closes in, Grimhelm makes the jump to hyperspace. Darkcore Frontiers, Season 1, The Stowaway, by Thomas Chase. Episode 13, A Spark in the Darkness. The door of the Nebula Nighthawk's single holding cell slammed shut. The room was lit by the tiny light of one monitoring camera. Nex stumbled forward. His eyes, still adjusting to the dark, swept across the cramped, reinforced metal walls, struts and pressure bars that extended from floor to ceiling before settling on a familiar figure seated in the corner. Auron Starling, stripped down to a loose-fitting shirt and cargo pants, looked up from his contemplative pose. A smile spread across his face.
Nex.
He sprang up from the narrow cot.
Nex, what happened?
Nex slumped against the wall and slid down until he sat on the cold floor. His hands trembled.
DC, he's gone.
He looked up into Auron's face.
I did what I could, but they got away. They have the shards.
Auron's smile faded. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees.
I see. I feared that might be the case. Pray tell me how they came to suspect your true motives.
Nex relayed the story. As he did, Auron tilted his head to one side, listening intently. When he finished, Auron looked up.
A setback, to be sure.
He rose to his feet, his face clearing.
But all is not lost. More difficult, perhaps, but not lost. The curtain has not yet fallen on our little drama.
What do you mean?
Nex said, gesturing around the cell.
How can we stop the pirates now?
Consider, if you will, the game of chess. When a skilled opponent captures one's queen, the match does not immediately conclude. Rather, it forces one to reassess, to devise new strategies.
Nex narrowed his eyes.
The stakes have risen. The margins for error have narrowed. But the game, Nex, is far from over. We must rely on our wits, our resolve, and perhaps a touch of audacity.
But DC is gone. What do we have left?
I would have thought that perfectly obvious. We are two highly resourceful individuals, you and I. And it so happens Grimhelm was foolish enough to lock up the one person on his team who is a locksmith.
But you don't understand. I don't actually know anything about security systems. I told DC to turn off security. He figured it out. He built his own database of knowledge. Without DC, I can't get us out of here. I have nothing.
Auron frowned.
I see. Well, that does add a new wrinkle to the situation.
He tapped his fingers. Then he looked down at Nex.
Tell me, your droid, if it was capable of doing these incredible things, how did it come by such learning?
Nex sighed, memories tumbling back.
I built DC when I was on my homeworld. Before everything happened.
He paused, swallowing hard. Auron shook his head.
Most remarkable. Tell me, by what means did you acquire such a profound knowledge of advanced robotics?
I guess it was my father, really. He was a scientist back where I come from. But on Zraynian, being good with machines wasn't exactly rare.
Just a moment. Did you say Zraynian?
Nex nodded. Auron's eyes widened.
But Zraynian was, by all accounts, utterly obliterated. How can this be?
Nex shook his head.
I'm not sure.
Auron studied him.
But the pieces begin to fall into place. Your fascination with these Darkcore shards now takes on a new significance. But I feared I've allowed my emotions to interrupt your narrative. Pray do continue with your account.
Nex shook his head.
I don't really want to talk about it.
Nex, I must implore you. Perhaps through your story we may devise a means of escape.
Nex sighed and nodded.
After Zraynian was destroyed, DC was all I had left. We've been hopping around, stowing away. Just trying to get by, I guess.
Ah, so, that is how you come to be here.
Auron mused, stroking his chin.
But tell me, Nex, about Zraynian. I have heard rumors regarding its mysterious downfall, but I should very much like to have a first-hand account of it.
Nex's thoughts grew distant.
Zraynian was... It's hard to even describe. It was beautiful. Our cities were almost alive. Always changing. And our tech, it grew and adapted. The Darkcore gems, they were the center of everything.
Of course they were. Such were the things of legend. Fairy tales.
His eyes stared at Nex with a new dawning of fascination. Perhaps a new respect. Or fear.
You are a Zraynian. I can't quite bring myself to believe it. These gems you speak of, they were the very lifeblood of your people, were they not?
Nex nodded.
Yes.
But...
Auron trailed off, his expression darkening.
But they destroyed us.
Auron furrowed his brow.
The thing is, I'm not really sure how they did it. There wasn't enough time to figure it out.
Auron nodded.
I understand that. The turmoil on Zraynian was... fraught, to say the least.
Blinking at Nex, he continued.
Perhaps you were too young to grasp the situation.
I don't remember anything about it.
Well then, I may be able to assist in filling in some of the missing details.
Nex nodded.
Naturally, this all transpired long before my time with the Space Authority. However, if my recollection serves me correctly, many desired the technology of your world. Demanded it even. But your people, they guarded it jealously.
I didn't get it all at the time, but I could feel it.
Auron nodded solemnly.
Indeed. Many viewed your people's refusal to share the gems as a threat to the unity of the galaxy at large. I can well imagine the pressure that must have mounted upon your people next. The temptation for the other worlds to seize such power by force, no doubt, grew ever more alluring. And when diplomacy failed, well...
Nex's brow furrowed.
But it wasn't just that, was it? There was something else going on.
Yes, there were. Other factors at play. When the Council, in their infinite wisdom, decided to launch a surprise invasion upon your homeworld, I rather suspect they never anticipated the consequences. But alas, I fear delving deeper into the sordid aftermath would only serve to further darken this already grim tale. Perhaps it would be best reserved for another time, when we find ourselves in less trying circumstances.
He paused, his expression softening.
Tell me, Nex, about that fateful night. What I can't quite understand is how you escaped.
Nex closed his eyes.
It was crazy. 1 minute, everything was normal. And then the next, the sky just lit up. Ships everywhere. Weapons I'd never seen before. Our defenses, they just weren't ready.
Auron leaned in, listening.
I remember running through our house. I grabbed DC and I just shoved him in my backpack. Didn't even think about it. Just did it. And then I saw it. This Darkcore gem my father had been keeping in our house. I knew it was there. But it was different this time. It was pulsing. Glowing with this power I'd never seen before. It's gonna sound weird, but it was almost like it was talking to me. Not with words or anything, but I don't know how to explain it. It was just calling me. I couldn't help it. I reached out to touch it. And then... darkness. Complete darkness. And the next thing I knew, I was on a Space Authority cruiser. I don't know what happened or how I got there. I was scared, I guess. But I stayed hidden there. Until we reached port. That's how I escaped. Sometimes I still see it when I close my eyes.
Auron placed a comforting hand on Nex's shoulder.
A harrowing tale indeed. You've carried this burden for so long, my young friend.
Nex looked up, his eyes glistening. A violent tremor ran through the ship. He was struck with the familiar sensation of exiting hyperspace.
It would appear that our journey has reached its end.
Auron mused, steadying himself against the wall. Nex's eyes widened.
Where do you think we are?
Auron raised an eyebrow.
Difficult to say.
They sat in tense silence for a few moments, straining to hear any clues about their situation. The stillness was broken by a surge of movement above their heads. Footsteps raced by and shouts bounced off the walls.
What's happening?
Nex whispered, pressing his ear against the metal. Auron closed his eyes.
Would appears by the sound of it, and in quite a hurry too. Listen. Do you hear that?
Nex focused. He picked out the distinct roar of welding torches and the clink of tools.
They're fixing the ship.
Suddenly, the sound of repairs was replaced by shouts and weapon fire.
What do we have here? Their circumstances have clearly taken a grave turn.
A resonant shudder rolled along the ship's frame, and the tug of G-forces pulled at his body as the Nebula Nighthawk tore free from the ground.
Well, well.
Auron smiled.
It would appear that our adventure is far from over.
The steady drone of the fusion drive grew louder. The Nighthawk rattled erratically, as if something was out of balance. Auron's smile faded.
We're accelerating,
he said, pressing his ear against the bulkhead.
That doesn't feel right. They're still having problems.
And if I'm not mistaken, that's the sound of the hyperdrive spooling out.
Nex blinked.
They're jumping again? But where?
His question was cut short by the uncomfortable sensation of being in two places at the same time. When the feeling passed, Auron turned to Nex with a grim smile.
Well, Nex, it would appear our captors are indeed in a state of haste. The true question, however, is whether they are fleeing from something or racing towards something.
It was a hull breach. They didn't stop long enough to fix that.
Auron smiled.
Ah, very good. My plan so far is proceeding quite satisfactorily.
Your plan?
A glint of mischief flickered in Auron's eyes.
Indeed. You see, I may have taken the precaution of activating a hidden tracker somewhere on this ship. The Space Authority is no doubt in close pursuit as we speak.
A tracker? What if Grimhelm finds it?
Now. Let us not borrow trouble. The device is well hidden, and I can assure you our captor Grimhelm will not stumble upon its existence unless he happens to know precisely what to look for.
Auron's eyes glinted.
Always have a trick in your back pocket. A lesson I learned during my days as a thespian on the stages of New Avalon.
He winked.
Thespian? What's that?
An actor, my dear Nex. Oh yes, it may surprise you that someone as humble as myself, born and raised in New Avalon, has trod the boards since I was but a mere lad.
His eyes took on a faraway look.
But I shall never forget my very first standing ovation. 16 years of age, playing the illimitable Puck in a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Auron smiled.
And I must say, this particular profession of mine has served me exceedingly well in my current line of work.
Nex found himself smiling.
It does sound pretty wonderful. But how did you go from that to this?
He gestured at their cell.
That's a pretty big career change.
Auron's expression sobered.
Well, that is, I must confess, a dark tale. You see, Nex, in the prime of my youthful 20s, I had entertained the most grand of ambitions. Along with my dear friend, Professor Ackroyd von Fitch at the New Avalon Academy of Sciences, I had embarked upon a project that I believed would truly revolutionize the art of theater.
What kind of project?
The use of cutting-edge technology to produce ever more baffling special effects for our theatrical productions, an endeavor that, regrettably, led to the creation of our current adversary, Grimhelm.
Nex's eyes widened.
You created Grimhelm?
You see, In our zeal to push the boundaries of what was possible on the stage, we unwittingly stumbled upon discoveries that would ultimately prove to be a double-edged saw.
Wait, you're kidding, right? But how?
We used the demonstration bones from Professor Feet's anatomy class to construct him. Feet had devised a most ingenious invention to bring my vision to life, an electrical current that induced an adhesion between the joints. Grimhelm is completely autonomous, with the one exception that he needs his power cell to be replaced every day.
But he was burned in a fire and brought back with robot parts.
Lies, Nex, lies, conjured up no doubt by Grimhelm himself. Allow me to assure you, the truth of the matter is quite different from what you have been led to believe.
Auron leaned forward, his piercing gaze fixed on Nex.
For Grimhelm, I can say with absolute certainty is no mere marriage of organic and machine.
His lips pressed into a thin line.
No, Grimhelm is in fact a completely cybernetic robot, devoid of any biological components. I know this to be true, Nex.
But why? Why would you ever create a robot like Grimhelm?
Ah, the irony of it all, Nex. You see, my original intention was to utilize Grimhelm in a grand production of Hamlet, to portray none other than the ghost of Hamlet's father. Can you imagine? The spectre of the late King Hamlet, haunting the stage, played by a veritable automaton of my own creation. Alas, it was not to be.
What happened?
Everything. The fateful night when what should have been a triumphant performance descended into sheer carnage. Grimhelm, he went rogue, Nex.
He trailed off, shaking his head.
The loss of life that ensued was devastating. Many perished, including my dear brother.
Nex sat in stunned silence. Finally, he spoke.
Is that why you're here? To stop him?
Auron nodded, a determined glint in his eye.
It has become the very mission of my life, Nex, to capture and deactivate the monstrous creation that I, in my misguided youthful ambition, helped to bring into this world. Since that first encounter, he has learned, adapted, evolved. For years, he disappeared, became this.
He gestured around the cell.
But I searched for him relentlessly. Joining the Space Authority ultimately became a means to an end.
Auron, I'm still confused about something. If Grimhelm's just a robot, how... I mean, why did he...
Go rogue?
Auron finished, his expression growing somber.
Yes, the very question that has haunted me for years. The truth of the matter is, I'm afraid we have never been entirely certain of the root cause. A flaw, perhaps, in his base programming, or perhaps an unexpected interaction between his advanced artificial intelligence and the specialized theatrical algorithms we had implemented to enhance his performance. In our hubris, we created something we did not fully comprehend. We imbued Grimhelm with the ability to improvise, to react to the audience and his fellow actors in real time. But we never considered the implications of granting such powers beyond the confines of mere performance.
Nex nodded.
So when he killed those people...
He was improvising, creating his own narrative, one of destruction and disorder. And we, the fools who brought him into being, were powerless to stop him.
A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the out-of-phase clatter of the ship's hyperdrive core. He felt bad for Auron. He was carrying around all this guilt and responsibility. It was like he was living in his own tragedy.
That's rough.
Auron's eyes met Nex's, filled with tears.
It is. But it's also what drives me. Every life Grimhelm takes, every act of destruction he commits. It's a reminder of my responsibility, and a renewal of my vow to stop him, no matter the cost.
Nex nodded.
Look, I know I'm probably the last person who should be giving out sympathy or whatever. I'm not exactly great at the whole feelings thing, but I get it. Well, I don't really get it, but I get that it sucks, big time. If you ever want to talk about it, or, I don't know, just sit in awkward silence or something, I'm here. Not that I'd be much help, but Sometimes it's nice to just have someone around, right?
Auron smiled.
Thank you, Nex. You've helped more than you know. In many ways, you remind me very much of my poor lost brother.
Nex slumped against the wall.
So what do we do now?
Auron's eyes sparkled.
Now, Nex, now we play our roles. We are not mere prisoners, but prisoners with hope. And hope, Nex, is a powerful force indeed.
As the Nebula Nighthawk carried them to an uncertain destination, Nex found himself clinging to Auron's words. In the darkness of their cell, surrounded by the metal of their prison, something small and bright stirred. A spark of hope. The Nebula Nighthawk surged forward. He and Auron settled in for the long haul. For the next hour, they sat in silence, ears straining to catch every sound that could piece together the puzzle of their captivity. Nex studied their cell. The door was a heavy, automated sliding type with bars made of a dense, high-grade alloy. It operated on a mechanical track system with a series of interlocking gears and hydraulic pistons. It had a triple lock system with a mechanical deadbolt, an encrypted keypad, and an auxiliary manual override that required a physical key. An old-fashioned safety measure in case of electronic failure. A series of sharp clangs reverberated through the ship, followed by the Nighthawk once again exiting hyperspace. Hurried footsteps moved over their heads.
What's happening?
Auron closed his eyes.
If I had to guess, I'd say our quarry has been forced to make an unscheduled stop. If the damage to this ship is as severe as I believe, their situation is indeed precarious. Listen.
In the distance, they could hear the muffled sound of shouted orders and the distinctive whine of weapons being discharged.
We're under attack again.
Auron nodded.
Their avenues of escape are dwindling rapidly. This may also afford us the advantage we seek.
Before Nex could ask what he meant, the ship lurched, throwing them both off balance. The lights jumped, then went out entirely, plunging them into darkness. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the emergency lighting kicked in. The sound of footsteps approached down the stairs. It was Slime, followed by Legatron. He stopped outside the cell door.
I have some delightful news for you. It seems we have some rather unwelcome attention. I suppose you know what that means, don't you? One of you has been quite naughty. Well, shall we start pointing fingers, or would you prefer to confess?
His bulbous eyes moved from one to the other.
You,
He pointed at Auron.
come with me. The captain wants to speak with you.
You've been listening to Darkcore Frontiers. If you enjoyed the story, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Wondrous Legends. And if you like this production, you can help us make Season 2 by supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/wondrouslegends. Thank you for listening.